It was Halloween night in a small town in upstate New York, the kind of place where everyone knew everyone else, and the streets were lined with old Victorian houses that looked picturesque during the day, but carried a certain weight of unease after dark. The air was crisp, carrying the smell of wet leaves and the faint tang of smoke from distant chimneys. Children ran from house to house, their laughter mingling with the crunch of leaves underfoot, while their parents trailed behind, clutching bags and keeping one wary eye on the traffic. It was the perfect setting for a Halloween that no one would forget. A group of four friends, Ryan, Matt, Jessica, and Laura, were driving around town in Matt's beat-up pickup, searching for the best decorations and most active trick-or-treat spots. They had just finished high school and were eager to squeeze every last thrill out of their teenage years. Matt, who had a fascination with the supernatural, kept teasing about visiting the old Holloway house on the edge of town, a dilapidated mansion that had been abandoned for decades. Rumor had it that the house had been the site of a gruesome murder back in the 1920s and that strange things happened there every Halloween. "I'm telling you," Matt said, leaning back in the passenger seat as Laura drove, "that house is cursed. People who go there at night, they don't come back the same. Sometimes they don't come back at all." Ryan rolled his eyes but couldn't hide a grin. "Come on, man. It's Halloween. If we're scared of a house, what's the point of even celebrating?" Jessica shivered despite herself. "I don't know. There's just something about that place. Even during the day, it looks wrong." Laura, always the cautious one, added, "We shouldn't go too close. What if someone actually lives there now? Or, I don't know. What if it's really dangerous?" Matt smirked. "Dangerous is the fun part." They drove in silence for a few minutes, the excitement of their prankish adventure mixing with a creeping sense of unease. The Holloway house loomed ahead, half hidden by overgrown weeds and the twisted branches of gnarled trees. Its windows were dark, some shattered, revealing glimpses of empty rooms inside. The front gate hung crookedly on its hinges, squeaking in the cold wind. "All right, let's get out and check it out," Matt said, hopping out of the truck. Ryan followed, tossing his backpack onto the grass. Jessica hesitated, clutching her sweater tightly, while Laura stayed near the driver's side, glancing around nervously. The air felt colder near the house, as though the temperature itself had dropped. The four of them approached the front door, the wooden steps groaning under their weight. Matt pushed the door open, and it creaked loudly, echoing through the empty halls like a warning. Inside, the house smelled of rot and mildew, mixed with something faintly metallic. Dust floated in the air, illuminated by the weak light of their flashlights. Old furniture lay in ruins, draped in moth-eaten sheets. The wallpaper was peeling, revealing dark stains underneath that looked unsettlingly like handprints. "This place is insane," Ryan muttered, stepping carefully over broken floorboards. "Yeah, insane and empty." Jessica said, though her voice betrayed a hint of fear, "Let's just look around for a few minutes and leave." They explored the ground floor, moving from room to room. Every creak and groan of the old house set their nerves on edge. Then, in the back corner of the house, they found a staircase leading down to the basement. Matt's eyes lit up. "Jackpot! This is where the real creepy stuff is." Laura shook her head. "Absolutely not. I'm staying up here." "Don't be such a wimp," Matt said, already heading down. Ryan and Jessica exchanged uneasy glances before following reluctantly. The basement smelled worse than the rest of the house, a thick, cloying stench of damp earth and decay. The light from their flashlights flickered as they descended, casting long, distorted shadows on the stone walls. The basement was larger than they expected. Old crates and broken furniture were stacked along the walls. At the far end, they noticed a doorway that had been boarded up, but the boards were rotting and easy to push aside. Matt shoved them aside, revealing a small, windowless room. Inside, they found remnants of old furniture, but what really caught their attention were the strange markings on the walls. Symbols etched deep into the wood, smeared with something dark that looked like dried blood. "What the hell is this?" Jessica whispered, stepping back. "Some kind of ritual," Matt said, kneeling to examine the floor. "Look at this. There's a circle drawn here with more of those symbols. This is wild. Someone must have done something really messed up down here." Ryan shivered. "We should leave, now." But before anyone could argue, a loud thump echoed from upstairs. All four froze. The sound was followed by another, then another, like someone was walking across the floorboards above them. "Who's there?" Laura called from above, her voice trembling. "Matt? Ryan?" "Laura, it's just us," Ryan shouted, but the sound of footsteps continued, moving closer. It was heavier than any of them, deliberate, slow, and impossible to ignore. Suddenly, the basement door slammed shut, trapping them in darkness. Their flashlights flickered and went out. In the pitch black, they could hear breathing, deep, guttural, and uneven. "Matt, what is that?" Jessica whispered, her voice barely audible. "I don't know," Matt said, panic creeping into his voice. "But we need to get out now." They scrambled to the door, but it wouldn't budge. The sound of footsteps grew louder, closer. A shadow flickered across the far wall, moving with a speed and fluidity that was unnatural. Ryan screamed as the shadow lunged at them, and the basement filled with a deafening roar, like metal scraping against stone. Somehow they managed to pry the door open and ran up the stairs, bursting into the main hall. The house was silent again, but everything felt different. The air was heavier, charged, as if the house itself was watching them. "Get out!" Laura screamed from the front porch. They didn't need to be told twice. They ran to the truck, Matt fumbling with the keys. When they finally got it started, they tore down the overgrown driveway and didn't stop until they were back in the safety of the town, breathing hard, their hands shaking. "Did anyone else see that?" Jessica asked, her voice trembling. The shadow, it wasn't just a trick of the light. It moved. Matt stayed silent, staring at the road ahead. He had felt it too, the malevolent presence that had been in the basement with them. He didn't know what it was or why it hadn't followed them out, but he knew one thing. The Holloway house wasn't done with them. That night, they tried to convince themselves it was over. They laughed, joked, and even tried to watch a scary movie to lighten the mood. But none of them slept. Every time the wind howled, every time a floorboard creaked, they jumped. Shadows in the corners of their rooms seemed to twitch unnaturally. And then, just before dawn, Ryan awoke to the sound of whispering. It was coming from the corner of his room, faint but distinct. He froze, straining to hear. The words were incoherent at first, like a language he didn't understand, but then he caught a phrase repeated over and over, "They belong to me. They belong to me." Ryan shook, unable to scream. The whispering continued for hours, fading only when the first rays of sunlight pierced through the window. He thought it was over until he checked his phone and found a text from an unknown number. "We saw you leave. We're waiting." Panic consumed him. He showed the text to the others, but none of them had received anything. That was when they realized the Holloway house didn't just haunt its grounds. It followed people. The text was an ominous reminder that whatever they had disturbed that night was far from finished. Over the next week, strange things happened. Doors in their homes would open and close by themselves. Objects moved from one place to another. At night, they would hear the same guttural breathing, always closer than they expected. Jessica claimed to see shadowy figures standing outside her window. Laura felt cold fingers brush against her arm as she slept. Matt began keeping a journal of everything, noting down patterns and details, but the more he wrote, the more the occurrences escalated. The breaking point came 10 days after Halloween. Ryan was alone in his house, scrolling through old news articles about the Holloway house. He stumbled across a report from the 1920s detailing the murder of a family inside that very basement, the same room they had entered. The report described the father as having gone mad after performing rituals in an attempt to communicate with the other side, eventually killing his wife and children before disappearing himself. The article ended with a chilling line. Locals report strange shadows and voices near the property each Halloween, as if the house itself hungers for those who enter its walls. Ryan felt a sudden coldness behind him. He turned slowly, heart pounding, and saw a shadow coalesce in the corner of his living room. It was darker than anything he had ever seen, almost like the absence of light itself. The shadow moved toward him with purpose. He tried to run, but his legs wouldn't respond. He felt a hand, cold, heavy, unrelenting, clamp down on his shoulder. A voice, deep and ancient, whispered in his ear, "They belong to me." Ryan screamed. The next morning, the truck they had driven on Halloween was found abandoned on the side of the road, covered in frost and leaves. There was no sign of Ryan, Matt, Jessica, or Laura. The town whispered, as towns do, about the 4 teenagers who had disappeared, last seen daring to explore the Holloway house. Each Halloween after, people claimed to hear whispers and see shadows near the property. Some said that if you were brave or foolish enough to enter the basement, you might never come back, and those who did return were never the same. Some nights, when the wind howls through the old town and the streets are empty except for a few wandering trick-or-treaters, residents swear they hear faint whispers carried on the wind saying, "They belong to me. They belong to me." Story the end. It was a crisp October evening in rural Pennsylvania, the kind of night where the wind moves through the trees like whispers, carrying with it the faint scent of decaying leaves and wood smoke. The town of Millfield was small, barely more than a cluster of houses, a general store, a diner, and a decrepit church on the hill. But for the people who lived there, Halloween was the one night of the year that seemed to bring everyone together. Kids dressed in homemade costumes ran from house to house, their laughter echoing down the empty streets, while adults leaned on porches or huddled around fire pits in their backyards. But there was one house on the outskirts of town that no one ever approached after dusk. Everyone in Millfield knew about the old Hargrove place, a 2-story Victorian with peeling paint, broken windows, and a sagging porch that creaked under the lightest step. Rumors swirled that the house had been abandoned for decades, yet faint lights were sometimes seen flickering in the upper windows on nights like Halloween. People said it was cursed or haunted by the Hargrove family, who had disappeared without a trace one night in 1974. Nobody had dared to investigate for years until that Halloween. It started with a group of high school seniors, 4 friends who thought they were brave enough to explore the house. Emily, the quiet, observant one. Jake, the daring and reckless leader. Sarah, Emily's cousin who was skeptical of ghosts but couldn't resist the thrill. And Tom, the newest addition to their circle, who had moved to Millfield just that year and wanted to prove he belonged. The 4 of them arrived at the edge of the Hargrove property just as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky with streaks of orange and purple. The air smelled of wet leaves and decay, and the trees surrounding the property groaned as if warning them away. "Seriously, are we really doing this?" Sarah asked, her voice tight with unease. "Come on, it's just an old house," Jake said, grinning. "Nothing's going to happen. It's Halloween, perfect time to scare ourselves." Emily didn't answer, but her hand tightened around the strap of her backpack, where she had stuffed a flashlight, a pocket knife, and her phone. Tom, trying to keep up with Jake's bravado, nodded along. "Yeah, we're fine. Totally fine." The porch creaked under their weight as they stepped inside. Dust motes floated in the narrow beams of their flashlights, and the smell of mildew was overpowering. The walls were lined with faded, peeling wallpaper, and the air was thick with the remnants of decades of neglect. As they moved from room to room, each creak of the floorboards sounded unnaturally loud, echoing through the empty house. At first, it was just the usual stuff, cobwebs in the corners, broken furniture, and the occasional scurrying of rats. But when they reached the staircase, things started to feel different. A cold draft drifted down from the upper floor, making Emily shiver. "Did you feel that?" she whispered. Jake rolled his eyes. "It's just the wind. This place is falling apart, remember?" Still, as they climbed the stairs, there was a strange sensation, like someone or something was watching them. Tom, who had been trying to hide his fear, stopped halfway up. "I don't know about this," he muttered, glancing over his shoulder. "Don't be such a wimp," Jake said, pushing forward. When they reached the second floor, they found themselves in a long hallway lined with closed doors. Some of the doors had jagged holes in them. Others were missing entirely. At the far end of the hall, there was a large room with a door that seemed older and sturdier than the others. The wood was dark, warped with age, and the doorknob was tarnished but intact. "This one," Jake said, pointing. "This is where it's at." Emily felt a pang of unease, but followed anyway. The 4 of them entered the room, and it immediately felt colder, almost oppressively so. The air smelled faintly of smoke and something metallic, like rusted blood. In the center of the room was a large, ornate mirror, its surface cloudy and streaked with grime. The frame was carved with intricate patterns of twisting vines and grotesque faces that seemed to leer at them. Jake stepped closer to the mirror, and as he did, the air seemed to shift. A low hum filled the room, barely audible at first, but growing steadily louder. Emily's flashlight flickered, and for a brief moment, the reflection in the mirror didn't match what was in the room. She could see herself, Sarah, Tom, and Jake. But behind them, a shadowy figure loomed, indistinct and flickering like smoke. "Guys, do you see that?" Emily asked, her voice trembling. Jake laughed nervously. "Relax, it's just a trick of the light." But it wasn't. The figure moved closer, and the reflection in the mirror began to warp. Faces appeared in the glass, twisted, screaming faces that weren't their own. Emily stumbled back, her heart racing, and the mirror seemed to ripple like water. Then a voice whispered from behind the glass, so soft that she almost missed it. "Get out." No one spoke for a long moment. Then Jake, trying to mask his fear, stepped forward and reached for the mirror. As soon as his fingers brushed the glass, the hum turned into a shriek. The air became heavy, suffocating, and the shadows in the room twisted violently. Emily grabbed his arm, pulling him back. "We need to leave now." They bolted from the room, running down the hallway, the house itself seeming to shake and groan around them. Doors slammed shut on their own, and the sound of footsteps echoed behind them, though when they looked back, no one was there. They reached the stairs and stumbled down, barely noticing the scratches appearing on the walls, as if the house itself was clawing at them. When they finally burst out of the front door into the cold night air, they didn't stop running until they reached the street. Breathing hard, they looked back, and the Hargrove house stood silent, its windows dark once more. Did that really happen?" Tom asked, voice shaking. Emily didn't answer. She couldn't. The memory of the mirror, of those faces, of the whispering voice was burned into her mind. The next morning, Emily tried to convince herself it had all been imagination. But when she checked her phone, she noticed something strange, a photo she didn't remember taking. It was a picture of the four of them standing in front of the mirror, but behind them, faintly visible, was a shadowy figure. Its eyes glowed faintly red, and its mouth was stretched into a silent scream. Over the next few days, strange things began to happen. Emily would hear whispers when she was alone, coming from corners or the attic. Objects in her room moved on their own. At night, she dreamt of the Hargrove house, of the mirror and of the faces pressed against it, screaming silently. And always in the back of her mind was that feeling of being watched. Jake and Tom weren't spared either. Jake, who had always been fearless, began having nightmares so vivid he would wake up covered in sweat, convinced someone was in his room. Tom claimed he could feel hands brushing against him while he slept, though he lived alone. Sarah, who had been the skeptic, started avoiding mirrors altogether, claiming they made her feel wrong, like she wasn't seeing her own reflection. Emily tried to research the Hargrove family, hoping to find some explanation. What she found was disturbing. The Hargroves had been a reclusive family, wealthy but secretive. On Halloween night in 1974, they had vanished without a trace. Police had searched the house but found nothing. No bodies, no signs of a struggle, nothing. Neighbors reported hearing strange noises, but no one had gone near the house after that. The case had gone cold, leaving only rumors and whispered stories. Determined to understand, Emily returned to the house one night, this time alone. She wanted to see the mirror again, to confront whatever was there. As she stepped onto the porch, the wind seemed to die down, and an unnatural silence settled over the property. The front door, once sturdy and locked, swung open with ease. Inside, the air was thick and cold. Dust swirled around her flashlight beam as she made her way to the second floor. The hallway seemed longer than she remembered, the shadows deeper. When she reached the room with the mirror, she froze. The glass was perfectly clear now, reflecting only her own face. But as she stared, her reflection smiled, an expression she wasn't wearing. Then the voice came again, louder this time. "Stay." Emily tried to look away, but she couldn't. The mirror's surface rippled, and the shadowy figure appeared once more, looming behind her reflection. Her reflection raised a hand, and so did the figure. Then, impossibly, the mirror pulled her in. She screamed, but no sound came out. Her body felt weightless, as though she was falling into darkness. She awoke in her bed, drenched in sweat, her phone clutched in her hand. The time read 3:17 a.m. Her heart pounded, but she tried to convince herself it was just a nightmare. Then she noticed something on her nightstand, a small, ornate piece of the mirror frame, blackened and carved with grotesque faces. Her blood ran cold. From that night on, Emily could no longer look in mirrors without seeing something behind her. The shadow followed her, not in reflection, but in the corner of her vision, waiting. Jake and Tom's experiences escalated too. Doors slamming, whispers, scratches appearing on their skin as though something invisible were marking them. Sarah eventually moved away, unable to cope with the terror. Years passed, but Emily never escaped it. Every Halloween, the feeling worsened, the presence growing stronger. She avoided mirrors, shunned her reflection, and never went near the Hargrove house again. Yet she knew it wasn't just the house, it was her. Whatever had touched her through that mirror had claimed a part of her soul. And every night, when the wind rustled through the trees and the leaves whispered across the empty streets of Millfield, Emily swore she could hear the faintest of voices calling her name, promising her return to the mirror, back to the shadows where the Hargroves waited for her. She never told anyone. Who would believe her? And deep down, she knew that if she did, it wouldn't matter, because the mirror doesn't care about belief. It waits, it's patient, until the next curious soul steps close enough to see what lies behind their reflection. Story the end. It started the week before Halloween, the kind of week where the air is sharp and dry, the kind where every corner of a small town seems to hold a secret you weren't supposed to see. I was living in a small, sleepy suburb in Pennsylvania, the kind of place where kids still went door to door for candy, and neighbors knew each other's business a little too well. My friends, a couple of college guys and one girl from work, had convinced me to go along on a sort of urban legend hunt. They were obsessed with all things creepy, especially during October. I'm not going to lie, I wanted to go because I thought it would be fun, a harmless thrill before Halloween itself. But as the days wore on, what started as curiosity became something much darker. We decided to start in the outskirts of town, near an old, abandoned farmhouse. People said the place had been empty for decades, after a series of mysterious deaths. Most of the stories we'd heard were local lore. The family that had lived there vanished one night, never to be seen again, leaving behind furniture, dishes, and even a few old clothes in the closets. Some claimed the place was cursed, that anyone who spent too much time there would see things, hear things. We didn't believe it, of course. That's what makes these things even creepier later on. You think it's all silly until it isn't. We arrived just before dusk. The sky was a bruised purple, the kind that makes shadows stretch longer than they should. The house itself was tucked behind overgrown weeds and fallen trees, its paint peeling and windows shattered in random spots. It looked like it had been eaten by time itself. As we got closer, the smell hit first. Damp wood, rot, and something metallic, like old blood. My stomach twisted, but I forced myself to ignore it. Bet no one's been inside in years, Jake, my roommate, said with a grin that didn't quite reach his eyes. He always tried to be brave, but I could see him tensing up. I dare you to go in first, I said, pretending to challenge him, though part of me hoped he would. Nope, you go, he replied instantly. The three of us hesitated at the doorway. I stepped over the threshold first, and the air inside was colder than it should have been, damp and heavy. Dust hung in the air like fog. Every step I took on the wooden floorboards made them groan, as if the house were alive, watching us. We started exploring room by room. Most of it was empty, just peeling wallpaper and broken furniture. Then we found it, a small room off to the side, almost like a hidden study. The door was cracked, but not broken. Inside, there were remnants of a life. An old desk covered in dust, papers scattered around, a single chair facing the wall. But what caught my eye was the calendar on the wall, frozen on October 31st. The year had been 1974. That's creepy, Mia whispered. She was usually the calm one, but now I could hear her voice trembling. I nodded. Yeah, it's like someone just walked out and never came back. That's when we heard the first sound. A soft thump, like someone dropping a book upstairs. None of us moved at first. The sound repeated, then a scraping, slow, deliberate. We all froze. Probably just the wind, Jake said, but his voice was too loud, too defensive. None of us believed him. We decided to check the second floor. The stairs creaked with every step. It was the kind of building where any sudden movement could wake the whole structure. At the top, the hallway stretched long and narrow, lined with rooms. One of the doors at the end was slightly ajar, darkness spilling out like a shadow that didn't belong. I felt a sudden chill crawl up my spine. Maybe we shouldn't, I started, but it was too late. Jake had already pushed the door open. Inside was a bedroom. The bed was intact, the sheets yellowed with age, and in the corner a small rocking chair moved gently back and forth. No breeze, no wind, just the chair. Moving. We froze, watching it. Then from the closet a whisper. Barely audible, just a syllable repeated over and over. Go, go, go. Mia grabbed my arm. We need to leave. Now. I wanted to argue, but the fear had already taken hold. As we turned to go, the door slammed shut behind us with a deafening crash. We all jumped, and for a moment the room fell silent again. Then the whispering started up, closer this time, circling us, impossible to locate. Panic took over. We smashed the door, tried to force it open, but it wouldn't budge. That's when the air changed. It got heavier, suffocating, and we could see our breath inside the room even though it wasn't that cold. Shadows pooled in the corners, stretching out toward us like fingers. I saw it first. A figure, blacker than shadow itself, standing in the corner of the room. No features, just a silhouette. But then it moved, slowly, deliberately toward us. We screamed and backed away, but the walls seemed to close in. Suddenly, everything stopped. The figure was gone, the room silent. The door creaked open, and we didn't hesitate this time. We ran down the stairs, out the front door, and didn't look back until we reached the safety of the car. We tried to laugh it off on the drive home, calling it imagination, adrenaline, or an old house settling. But deep down, we all knew it wasn't. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every creak in the apartment sounded like footsteps. Every shadow seemed to linger just a second too long. The next day, I went online, trying to find any records of the house, the family. That's when I found it. The family that lived there had disappeared on Halloween night, 1974. Police reports said there was no sign of struggle, no signs of forced entry, nothing. Just gone. I showed Jake and Mia. They were pale, silent. That night, we tried to avoid the topic, but it came up in fragments, half-whispered. Halloween itself arrived with a biting wind and clouds heavy with rain. The streets were full of kids in costumes, but none of it could shake the unease we all felt. We tried to stick together, not to go near the old farmhouse, but a few of our friends dared us to drive by. We didn't want to, but something inside me, something morbid and stubborn, made me say yes. The drive was quiet, the rain slicking the roads and making headlights glare. We turned onto the old dirt path leading to the farmhouse, and for a second, the house looked different. Alive, almost. Shadows shifted across the windows, and the same feeling of being watched clawed at me. Then, in the rearview mirror, I saw it. The figure, standing in the middle of the path behind us, black and featureless, its head tilted slightly. I slammed the brakes. Mia screamed. Jake swore. But when we looked again, it was gone. We drove past the house faster than I've ever driven, hearts pounding. The rain beat against the windshield like a warning. When we finally reached the main road, we stopped, gasping, trying to catch our breath. That night, strange things started happening at home. I'd wake up to whispers, soft at first, then growing louder. Doors would creak open on their own. Lights flickered. Once I could swear I saw the figure standing at the foot of my bed, watching. But when I turned on the light, it was gone. Jake and Mia reported similar things. Phones ringing with no one on the line, shadows in the corner of their vision. The air around them felt heavy, oppressive. It was as if the house had followed us, or worse, as if whatever had been in that house had marked us. Over the next few weeks, the experiences escalated. Friends of ours who didn't even go near the farmhouse started telling us about nightmares they'd had involving a dark figure standing over them, whispering the same words we'd heard. Go, go, go. We tried to rationalize it, therapy, sleep studies, even moving a few blocks away. Nothing worked. The feeling of being watched never went away. And every year as Halloween approached, it came back stronger. Shadows that shouldn't be there, whispers in empty rooms, the unmistakable sensation of being followed. It's been years since that first night at the farmhouse, and I still can't shake it. Every Halloween, no matter where I am, I feel that presence creeping closer, watching, waiting. I've tried to warn others, tell them not to seek out the old house, but curiosity is a hard thing to fight. Sometimes I think about going back, confronting it, but a part of me knows some things aren't meant to be faced. Some doors, once opened, never truly close. The worst part is that I'm not alone. I know there are others marked by that place. People who went there, even out of curiosity, and came away changed. Who knows how many of those who disappeared that night in 1974 weren't the first, and certainly weren't the last? Every Halloween, I see the same black shape in my dreams, at the edge of the forest, at the corner of my eye in the shadows, waiting. Waiting to remind me that some curiosities are better left alone. That some stories are true, even if you don't want to believe them. And every year I hear that same whisper, and it doesn't matter where I am. Go, go, go. I've stopped going out at night during Halloween. I stay home, blinds drawn, lights on. But I still hear it sometimes, brushing against the edges of my consciousness, a reminder that the farmhouse is still out there, and whatever is in it is still waiting. Waiting for the next curious soul. Waiting for the next Halloween. I don't know if I'll ever feel safe again, and honestly, I'm not sure I want to find out what happens if I do. Some things I've learned are meant to haunt. Not just in stories, but in life. And in the small, quiet town where I live, the story of the farmhouse isn't a tale to scare kids. It's a warning. One that I and the others who were there that night learned the hard way. I don't know how long it will last. Maybe the presence will fade eventually. Maybe it won't. But one thing is certain. Halloween isn't a holiday for fun. Not for those of us who know. It's a night when the past doesn't stay buried, when shadows move where they shouldn't, and when you realize that some horrors are real, and they don't need a reason to find you. And every year when the air turns sharp and the wind whispers through the trees, I remember that night. The farmhouse, the shadows, the whispers. And I know that some part of that darkness is still out there, still watching, still waiting. And every year when Halloween comes, it's only a matter of time before it finds you too. Story the end. It was late October in a small town in Pennsylvania, the kind of town that seemed frozen in time. Maple trees lined the streets, their leaves flaming shades of red and orange, crunching under the feet of children in costume. The air carried that faint, crisp chill that made your breath visible, and every front yard was decorated with pumpkins, fake cobwebs, and flickering jack-o'-lanterns. The town had a reputation for going all out for Halloween, but for the residents on the edge of town, near the woods, it was different, quieter, stranger, more isolated. I had just turned 18 and was home from my first semester at college. My friends and I were planning to hit a few Halloween parties that night, but I decided to take a short walk to the woods at the edge of town first. There was an old legend about those woods. They called it Hollow Pines. Supposedly decades ago, a man named Amos Keller had lived in a cabin deep in those woods. Amos was a recluse, rumored to have dabbled in dark rituals. One Halloween night, he disappeared, and no one ever saw him again. Over the years, kids whispered about hearing whispers in the trees, shadows that moved against the wind, and the faint smell of smoke that sometimes drifted out of the woods when no one was there. I wasn't exactly scared of legends. I had always been curious about them, so I left the warm light of the porch and ventured into the woods just as the sun was beginning to set. The crunch of leaves beneath my boots was the loudest sound for a long stretch, and the forest seemed unusually quiet otherwise. The air was dense, almost sweet-smelling, like burning sugar. I laughed to myself at the cliché, feeling the excitement of walking somewhere haunted, as a kid might dream about. As I walked further, the trees thickened, their twisted branches forming shadows that looked like grasping hands. That's when I noticed it. A faint orange glow deep in the woods. I thought maybe someone had a campfire, or perhaps there was a cabin still standing from years ago. I followed the glow cautiously, stepping over roots and fallen branches. Every now and then I thought I saw something moving in the corner of my eye, but when I turned, there was nothing. Just the dimming sunlight and the whisper of the wind. Eventually I came upon an old cabin. Its wooden walls were blackened with age and smoke stains, windows broken, and the door hanging crookedly on its hinges. The glow came from inside. My curiosity overrode my common sense, and I stepped closer. I could hear what sounded like chanting, low and guttural, almost like a language I didn't know. The floorboards creaked beneath me, and I realized with a sudden jolt that this cabin hadn't been abandoned. Someone or something was inside. I froze at the doorway. The chanting stopped. Silence. Then I saw them, figures moving in the shadows. There were at least 3, maybe 4, standing around a circle on the floor. Candles flickered, casting long, distorted shadows against the walls. In the center of the circle was what looked like a mask, pale and expressionless, almost lifelike, resting on a bed of dried leaves and small bones. One of the figures noticed me, or sensed me. It lifted its head slowly, revealing a face completely obscured by a dark hood. "Who's there?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady, but it came out higher pitched than I intended. The figure didn't answer. Instead, it stepped forward, and the chanting resumed, this time louder, almost deafening. The other figures joined in, and the mask in the center began to glow faintly. I felt my stomach knotting, my legs frozen in place. It wasn't just a ritual. It was like the forest itself was pressing in, drawing me closer. I realized then I had no idea what I had stumbled into. Panic surged, and I turned to run. The forest had changed, trees were closer together, and the paths I thought I remembered were gone. Every time I tried to retrace my steps, I ended up deeper in the woods, the chanting following me, echoing through the trees. I could feel the presence of those figures behind me, and it wasn't just fear. It was something more primal, like the earth itself didn't want me to leave. I tripped over a root and fell, scraping my hands on the damp ground. When I looked up, one of the hooded figures was standing directly in front of me. I could see its eyes now, glowing faintly orange through the shadow of the hood. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. It raised a hand, pointing at me, and then the others appeared, surrounding me in a semicircle. The chanting grew louder, reverberating through my bones. Then, just as suddenly as it began, it stopped. The figures were gone. I was alone in the clearing, the mask on the ground still faintly glowing. My heart raced, but I forced myself to my feet and ran, not looking back. When I finally broke through the tree line, I was on the edge of town again, the warm lights of street lamps flickering against the darkening sky. I collapsed on the sidewalk, trembling and gasping for air. I didn't tell anyone what I saw. No one would have believed me, and I wasn't sure I wanted anyone else knowing. But that night, Halloween itself felt different. Every shadow seemed longer, every rustle of leaves like footsteps following me home. I couldn't sleep, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something had followed me out of the woods. Weeks passed. Life went on, but the feeling never left. Small things started happening. Lights flickering in my room when I was alone, whispers just at the edge of hearing, and the smell of burnt sugar lingering in the air. I told myself it was stress, exhaustion, Halloween paranoia, anything to rationalize it. Then, one night, my little brother came running into my room. He was pale, trembling, holding a small, handmade mask. "I found it outside," he whispered. "By the woods." I froze. It was the same mask from the cabin, the pale, expressionless face. I grabbed him and ran to the backyard, searching frantically for the figures. The glow, anything. There was nothing. But the mask seemed to pulse faintly, as if alive. That night, I didn't sleep. The mask stayed on my desk, glowing faintly in the dark. Every time I looked away, I could swear it had shifted slightly, tilting its head as if watching. Over the following weeks, the incidents escalated. Doors I'd locked would be open in the morning, windows unlocked, strange footprints appearing in the yard. The mask would appear in different rooms, always in plain sight, though I never touched it, and always the faint smell of burnt sugar. I tried to get rid of it. I buried it in the woods near my house, but it was back on my desk the next morning. I tried throwing it in the river, but it washed up on the bank outside my window that night. It was like the mask had a mind of its own, tethered to me, tethered to the house. Halloween came around again. I thought I might be able to ignore it, but I couldn't. The air smelled the same, crisp and sweet with fallen leaves. I could hear faint whispers outside my window, and the mask glowed brighter than ever. I felt like a part of the woods had followed me home the year before, and now it was ready to claim me. I called a friend, someone who believed in these things, someone who had studied folklore. She came over, examined the mask, and turned pale. "This isn't just a mask," she said. "It's a conduit. Whatever Amos Keller did, whoever those figures were, They bound something into this object, and it's looking for a host. We decided to burn it right there in the backyard. Um, Candles, lighter fluid, everything. As soon as the flames touched the mask, the wind picked up. The trees rattled like they were alive, and I could hear the chanting from the woods louder than ever, echoing through the neighborhood. My friends shouted to me to keep it in the flames. I grabbed the mask, holding it as the fire consumed it. The smell of burnt sugar turned into smoke that stung my eyes. The chanting grew into a roar, and then suddenly, silence. The mask was gone. The wind died down, and the woods outside my house were quiet. For the first time in months, I felt safe. I thought it was over. But when I woke the next morning, there was something on my nightstand, a small, charred piece of the mask, pale and cracked, with a faint orange glow pulsing from within. I knew then it wasn't over. It would never be over. Every Halloween, every year, I can feel it calling, whispering, waiting for me to slip up, to follow it back into Hollow Pines. I never go near those woods anymore, but I can feel them. The shadows in the corners of my house grow longer around Halloween. The smell of burnt sugar rises from nowhere, and sometimes I hear faint chanting just outside my window. My little brother refuses to go into the backyard at night. He knows, somehow, that something is still there. The mask never returned to its full form, but the pieces that remain are enough. They're enough to remind me that what I saw wasn't a story. The woods weren't just haunted. They were hungry. And it found me first. Every year when October rolls around, I make sure to keep the lights on. I never go out after dark, but the smell comes anyway, the whispers, and sometimes, when I'm alone, I can feel something brushing against my shoulder, a presence just beyond the edge of my vision, something waiting. Last Halloween, I heard my name whispered through the house. Come back. I didn't, but I know it's waiting. Story the end. It was late October in a small town in rural Pennsylvania, the kind of place where Halloween wasn't just a holiday, it was practically a season. The leaves were a mixture of burnt orange, deep red, and fading yellow, carpeting the narrow streets in layers that crunched underfoot. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of wood smoke and wet leaves. Kids ran around in costumes, clutching pillowcases full of candy, while their parents scurried behind, offering reminders to stick to the well-lit streets. The town had its traditions, the annual pumpkin festival, the haunted cornfield on the edge of town, and, of course, the stories. Stories that weren't just legends or ghost tales meant to scare children, but true accounts of odd happenings that older residents still whispered about when the moon was full and the wind pushed through the trees like the wail of someone lost. I had moved to this town 2 months earlier, taking a job as a high school English teacher. The apartment I rented was above an old bookstore on Main Street. It was cozy enough, but I had learned quickly that the building had a strange aura. At night, the floors creaked in patterns that made no sense, and sometimes I would wake up feeling watched, as if someone had been sitting on the edge of the bed for hours. I chalked it up to moving into an old place in my imagination, but now thinking back, I wasn't sure it was that simple. On Halloween night, I had planned to meet a few colleagues at a local pub after their own trick-or-treating. The town's streets were busy, kids in costumes darting from porch to porch, their laughter and shouts echoing down narrow alleys. I had dressed casually, a black hoodie and jeans, figuring the night would be more about socializing than costume contests. As I walked to the pub, I noticed a figure standing near the corner of my street. It was a man in an old-fashioned suit, maybe from the 1920s, with a bowler hat pulled low over his eyes. At first, I thought it was a costume. After all, it was Halloween, but something about the way he stood unnaturally still made my stomach tighten. I passed him, nodding awkwardly, and kept walking. When I glanced back a few moments later, he was gone. Just gone. There was no alley, no doorway he could have slipped into. It was like he had evaporated. I shook my head and tried to laugh it off. Pennsylvania has its share of history, and I suppose someone could have been a history buff taking things a little too far. At the pub, the atmosphere was lively. Everyone was in costumes, the beer was flowing, and the jukebox was playing a mix of classic rock and seasonal Halloween hits. My friends were all there, in various disguises. One was dressed as a zombie nurse, another as a vampire. We laughed and joked, trading stories of strange things that had happened in the town. I tried to push the encounter with the man out of my mind, but a knot of unease lingered. Around 10 p.m., I decided to leave. The pub was crowded, and I wanted to check on my apartment, maybe turn in early. The streets had quieted down considerably. Most kids had gone home, and only a few stragglers in costumes wandered under the dim streetlights. As I walked back, I noticed the man again. Same suit, same bowler hat, standing in the shadows of the old bookstore where I lived. My pulse quickened. I approached cautiously. "Hey," I called, though my voice sounded small and unsure. "Everything okay?" He didn't move, didn't respond. Just stood there, like a shadow that had stepped out of another time. And then he raised a hand, pointing down the street. I squinted, trying to see what he was indicating, but the street was empty. I shook my head and hurried into my building, locking the door behind me. Inside, the apartment felt warmer, safer, and the familiar creaks of the floorboards were somehow comforting. I tried to shake off the unease, telling myself that alcohol, late-night fatigue, and the general creepiness of Halloween were making me paranoid. That night, I slept fitfully, waking multiple times to noises I couldn't identify. At one point, I was certain I saw a shadow move across the ceiling, though my bedroom light was off. When I opened my eyes, nothing was there, but the sensation of being watched didn't leave. The next morning, I awoke to a voicemail from my neighbor downstairs, Mrs. Henderson, who ran the bookstore. She sounded flustered, almost panicked. "I don't know if you noticed last night, dear," she said, "but there was a man here. Said he was looking for someone, and when I told him nobody lived here, he just disappeared." I frowned. "What do you mean disappeared?" "I don't know. One second he was there, leaning against the counter, and the next, nothing. The door was closed, but he was gone. I thought maybe it was a trick of the streetlights or someone playing a joke, but it felt wrong." I hung up, my heart hammering. It wasn't just me then. There was something odd about that man. Over the next week, I kept seeing him. Always in the distance, always in the same spot, sometimes standing near the streetlights, sometimes disappearing behind a corner or a building. No one else seemed to notice him. I mentioned it to a coworker, and she frowned. "Are you sure you're not just seeing things? That building has a lot of shadows and reflections at night. Halloween's been known to mess with people's heads." I wanted to believe her, but deep down I knew it wasn't just my imagination. Something about him felt deliberate, as if he was waiting for me to notice him. A week later, on the night before Halloween, things escalated. I was walking home late from grading papers when I felt it, a presence behind me. Not a normal presence, but heavy, suffocating, the kind that presses into your chest. I turned, expecting to see someone, and there he was. Closer this time, maybe 20 feet away, watching me. I froze. He didn't move, didn't blink. I tried to walk faster. He mirrored my pace from a distance, never coming closer, but never retreating. My apartment felt miles away, and every step felt like a decision between logic and fear. When I finally turned onto my street, I expected to reach the safety of the building and see him fade into the shadows. But he was at my door. Not outside, not on the street, but directly in front of the entrance, perfectly still. I ran inside, slamming the door, locking it, and collapsing against it, heart hammering. I could hear him outside, the soft scraping of shoes against the old wooden steps, like he was pacing. I sat there, holding a kitchen knife, telling myself I was imagining it, telling myself it was a prank, but the sound persisted. Morning came, but the unease didn't leave. I didn't sleep. Instead, I spent the day watching from the window. Nobody came to the door. Nobody called. There was no note. Just the knowledge that last night had been real. Halloween arrived, and the town was bustling. The streets were filled with costumes and laughter, but I avoided them, staying close to my apartment. Around dusk, there was a knock at the door. My heart stopped. I crept over, knife in hand, and peeked through the peephole. No one was there, just a small pumpkin on the doorstep. It wasn't carved, just a raw orange pumpkin. I picked it up, examining it. There was a note tucked into the stem, written in elegant cursive, "I see you." I dropped the pumpkin and backed away. My hands shook as I dialed 911, reporting the note and my experiences. The dispatcher was polite but skeptical, asking if I had any proof or if anyone else had seen anything. I explained about Mrs. Henderson, but the police said they would come by later, noting that it was Halloween and that pranksters often left messages and props. Night fell, and the sense of dread returned. The streets outside were alive with trick-or-treaters, but I couldn't bring myself to go out. Around 10 p.m., I heard it, the soft tapping of shoes on the steps again, but this time it was paired with a sound I will never forget. A voice, barely a whisper, coming from right outside my door. Happy Halloween. I froze, paralyzed. The voice was familiar in a way that shouldn't have been. It wasn't taunting, not exactly. It was almost casual, like he had been waiting to say it. My hands were shaking violently as I called out, "Who's there?" No answer. I waited until I could no longer hear the voice or the footsteps, but when I finally dared to look, the pumpkin was back on the doorstep. This time, carved with a grotesque grinning face, and in the hollow of its mouth, a single key. I don't know why, but I took it. Maybe curiosity, maybe fear of what ignoring it would bring. I kept the key, trying to make sense of it. Over the next few weeks, I found that every time I left the apartment after dark, I would see him. He never spoke again, never left another note, but his presence was undeniable. Sometimes he would appear at the edge of my vision, in reflections, in shadows, always watching, always patient. Months passed. Eventually, I learned that the building I lived in had a dark history. Many decades ago, a man who lived there had disappeared without a trace around Halloween. His body was never found. Some locals whispered that his spirit lingered, bound to the place, waiting. I realized then that what I had experienced wasn't a prank or imagination. It was something tied to the very walls I walked on every day. The man in the bowler hat never hurt me, never crossed the line into violence, but his presence was constant, a reminder that the world isn't always as safe as we think, that some things don't rest quietly even after death. I learned to live with it, to ignore the shadows that stretched a little too long, the corners of my vision where he might be standing. But every Halloween, the same dread returns, and sometimes, late at night, when the wind presses against my windows and the leaves rustle like whispers, I swear I can hear soft footsteps pacing outside my door. And I know, without a doubt, that he is still waiting. Story the end. It started as a normal October in a small town in Ohio, the kind of place where the streets were lined with maple trees whose leaves had turned a bright, fiery orange and red. The air was crisp, carrying the faint smell of wood smoke and pumpkin spice from the nearby cafes. The town had always taken Halloween seriously. People went all out with decorations, haunted hayrides, and parties that lasted late into the night. But the year this story takes place, something felt different, something in the air that didn't belong to the normal autumn chill. My friends and I were in high school at the time, seniors in our last semester before college. We were a tight-knit group, 4 of us who had grown up together, doing everything from ditching class to hanging out at the local mall. Halloween was always our favorite time of the year because it gave us an excuse to explore, to push boundaries, and to scare ourselves in ways that felt thrilling and dangerous. That year, our plan was ambitious. We wanted to spend the night at the old Abernathy house on the edge of town, a place everyone in our town had rumors about. Some said it was haunted, others said it had been abandoned for decades after the previous owner disappeared under mysterious circumstances. The Abernathy house wasn't far from the main roads, but it was surrounded by woods, and the path leading up to it was barely more than a dirt track. The house itself was a 2-story Victorian with peeling paint and boarded-up windows. From the street, it looked empty, but we knew from the stories that the inside was another world. Local kids had claimed to hear strange noises, whispers, footsteps, even screams late at night. Some swore they saw shadowy figures moving behind the boarded windows. We were nervous, sure, but mostly excited. This was going to be the ultimate Halloween adventure. We arrived at dusk, the sky darkening rapidly and the wind carrying the first hints of a cold front. I remember parking my car a few hundred feet from the house because the overgrown driveway was nearly impossible to navigate. We had flashlights, snacks, and a few cameras because, of course, we wanted to document everything. There was an unspoken challenge between us that night to see who could last the longest in the house, who could handle the scariest part without running out screaming. The moment we stepped onto the porch, the air seemed heavier, thicker, almost suffocating. The wooden steps creaked under our weight. There was a smell, a mix of mold and rot, that hit us instantly. I remember thinking, this is it. This is real. Not a haunted house at the carnival, not some staged scene for a party. We were really here. We pried open the front door, which hadn't been opened in years. It groaned, swinging inward with a sound that echoed through the empty rooms like a warning. Dust floated in the fading light, and the floor was covered in debris, old newspapers, broken furniture, and what looked like old children's toys scattered across the main hall. The walls were yellowed with age, and the wallpaper was peeling in long strips. There was a staircase leading to the second floor, a grand chandelier hanging precariously above, swaying slightly as if disturbed by a ghostly hand. At first it was fun. We dared each other to go into different rooms, to explore the dark corners with our flashlights. We laughed nervously at every creak, every shadow that moved just a little too fast. But about an hour in, something changed. The air felt colder, and the sounds inside the house started to feel less like old wood settling and more like deliberate noises. At first, it was small things, soft thumps like someone walking above us. We assumed it was the wind or the loose boards. Then we heard whispering, faint but distinct, coming from the hallway upstairs. We froze. "Did you hear that?" one of my friends whispered. We all nodded, gripping our flashlights tighter. I don't remember who suggested it, but we decided to split up, thinking we could cover more ground and maybe scare each other a little. My friend Jake and I went upstairs while the others stayed on the first floor. The stairs creaked louder than ever, each step echoing through the house. Upstairs, the hallway was narrow and lined with closed doors. I could feel my heart pounding. My flashlight flickered, and I had to tap it several times before it stayed on. Jake was ahead of me, moving quickly, almost running. "Come on," he hissed, his voice barely audible. We reached the end of the hallway and found a room that seemed untouched. The door was partially open, and inside there was a child's bedroom frozen in time. Small beds with tattered sheets, toys scattered on the floor, and a dresser with its drawers pulled out. But what made my stomach twist wasn't the decay. It was a small journal lying open on the floor, its pages yellowed with age. I picked it up and started flipping through it. The entries were dated from the 1970s, written in a child's scrawl. They were mundane at first, notes about school, friends, and family. But as I read on, the tone shifted. The writing became darker, obsessive. The child, a girl named Emily, wrote about the people in the walls and watching me when I sleep. She mentioned hearing whispers and footsteps that weren't anyone in the house. She even wrote about trying to tell her parents, but they didn't believe her. The last entry was a single sentence scribbled in panic. "They are coming for me tonight." I dropped the journal in shock, and Jake and I exchanged a look. We both knew it was too much, too real. We decided to get the others and leave. As we turned to go back down the hallway, I heard it, a faint, childlike giggle coming from the room we just left. Not playful, not happy, but cold and mocking. Jake swore he heard it too, and we bolted down the stairs, almost tripping in our haste. When we got to the main floor, the other two friends weren't where we left them. Panic set in. We called their names, but the only response was the creaking of the house, echoing back at us. Then we heard it, footsteps running across the floor above us. Not one set of steps, but two, moving quickly, deliberately. The whispering returned, louder now, surrounding us, coming from every corner of the room. We ran for the front door, but it slammed shut just as we reached it. We tried the windows. They were all locked or too decayed to open. That's when I noticed something moving in the shadows, near the staircase. A figure, small, hunched, moving impossibly fast. We screamed and backed into the hall, our flashlights shaking in our hands. The figure disappeared as suddenly as it appeared, but the whispers grew louder, overlapping, almost chanting. In sheer terror, we ran to the back of the house and found a door we hadn't noticed before. It led to a basement, dark and musty with the smell of earth and decay. I didn't want to go down there, but the other door at the front of the house was still sealed. Jake took the lead, flashlight in hand. The basement was larger than I expected, filled with broken furniture, boxes, and old tools. Then we saw it, a wall covered in scratches, deep and jagged, almost clawed into the plaster. Words were etched into the wall, "Leave or stay forever." We didn't need more warning. We scrambled to find another exit and found a small crawl space that led outside. It was tight, but we pushed through, cutting ourselves on the rough edges, and finally stumbled into the backyard. The cold night air hit us like a punch to the face. We didn't stop running until we reached the car. As we drove away, I looked in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see something following us. The house sat there in darkness, silent as if nothing had happened. But when we got home and compared our stories, we realized something horrifying. The other two friends had never gone upstairs. They had stayed in the living room the whole time, just like we assumed. They hadn't heard the footsteps, the whispers, or the giggling. We were the only ones who had. The next day, we tried to tell other people about what happened, but the town had mostly forgotten the Abernathy house. Some locals remembered the girl, Emily, who disappeared in the 70s. Her parents had claimed she ran away, but no one had ever seen her again. There were rumors she had been taken by something evil that lived in the house. Most people laughed when we told our story, writing it off as typical teenage imagination fueled by fear and adrenaline. We didn't go back, and over the years, we drifted apart. But every October, around the time the leaves started to turn, I feel that same chill in the air. The memory of that night stays with you, haunting the quiet moments, the shadows at the edge of your vision. And sometimes, just sometimes, I hear that faint giggle, echoing through my mind, reminding me that some places should never be explored, some stories should never be read, and some horrors don't end when you leave. They follow you home. Years later, I returned to Ohio for a visit, walking past the old Abernathy house. The windows were still boarded, the paint still peeling. But as I passed, I could swear I saw a small figure standing at the window, watching, waiting. I didn't stop, I didn't look back, and I never went near that house again. Some things in life are meant to stay forgotten, locked away in the shadows where they belong. But there are moments when curiosity breaks that barrier, and once it does, there's no turning back. Halloween in particular has a way of stripping away the safety of normalcy, revealing what lurks beneath the surface. That year, I learned that some stories are true, some horrors are real, and some nights never really end. Even now, decades later, when the wind rustles the autumn leaves outside my window, I feel it. The same oppressive weight, the same whispering in the dark. And I know without a doubt that the Abernathy house is still out there, still waiting, still hungry for someone foolish enough to enter. And somewhere in the shadows, Emily waits too, a reminder of what curiosity can awaken and what horrors can linger long after the sun has risen. Story the end. The night of Halloween in Cedar Hollow always carried a certain energy, a mix of excitement and unease, the kind of tension that made the air feel just a little too thick. That year it felt heavier, as if the town itself was holding its breath. I moved there only a few months earlier for work, taking a teaching position at the local high school. Cedar Hollow wasn't big, barely over 5,000 people, but it had a charm that drew in tourists every fall for its elaborate Halloween festivities. Pumpkins lined every porch, lights twinkled in odd patterns along streets that twisted like a maze, and the smell of caramel apples mingled with the crisp autumn air. I was excited for the first real American Halloween of my life. I thought it would be fun. I thought it would be harmless. I didn't expect it to turn into something I would never forget. It started in the late afternoon, around 5 p.m. I had decided to walk through the town square to see the decorations. The sun was dipping low, casting long shadows across the cobblestones. Kids ran past in costumes, their laughter echoing eerily off the old brick buildings. Some of them wore the typical ghosts, witches, and superheroes, but a few had gone all out. Faces painted like skulls, masks that seemed a little too realistic, costumes so grotesque they made my skin crawl. The feeling of unease started subtle, creeping up my spine, but I brushed it off as being overly sensitive. After all, it was Halloween. I wandered into a narrow alley between two storefronts that had been decorated with fake cobwebs and flickering lights. At the end of the alley, I noticed a small group of teenagers huddled together. They weren't like the others. There was something about their posture, the way they stood, that didn't feel like play acting. They were whispering among themselves, and every so often one of them would glance toward me as if I shouldn't be there. I slowed my pace but didn't turn around. That's when I heard the faintest sound, a soft irregular tapping, like fingernails lightly drumming against brick. I stopped and listened. The sound didn't come again, but the hair on my arms was standing on end. I continued walking, convincing myself it was probably a branch hitting the wall or someone playing a trick. That night, I had plans to meet a couple of coworkers at the local diner for some post-school coffee. The diner was the kind of place that looked frozen in time. Red vinyl booths, a black and white checkered floor, and a jukebox that still played old rock hits. I walked in and immediately noticed a man sitting alone in the corner. He had on a dark hooded jacket and his head was bowed low. Something about him felt off, though I couldn't put my finger on it. The diner was busy, filled with costumed families, and yet it seemed like he was the only one I couldn't see clearly. I shrugged and joined my coworkers. We talked, laughed, and ordered pie. Everything felt normal until I went to the restroom. On the way back, I noticed the man was gone, which struck me as odd because he had been there the entire time I was inside. I didn't think much of it. Maybe he had left. But something about the way he disappeared gnawed at me. The night outside was colder, and the street lamps cast jagged shadows on the pavement. After coffee, we decided to walk through the residential part of town. The houses were decorated elaborately. Some had fog machines and motion-activated animatronics that groaned or screamed when approached. It was all meant to be playful, yet the further we walked, the more the atmosphere shifted. At one particular house near the edge of town, I noticed a small, boarded-up house that had no decorations. The paint was peeling, windows cracked, and there was a single pumpkin at the doorstep, carved crudely, almost childlike. But the pumpkin's eyes weren't hollow. They seemed painted in, unnaturally dark, almost wet. I could swear it looked directly at me. As we walked past, one of my coworkers, Mark, joked about the house being haunted. He laughed, but his laughter was nervous. Something about that comment made me look back. I thought I saw a figure standing in the upstairs window, watching us, but when I blinked, it was gone. We ended the night back at my apartment, a small two-bedroom place on the outskirts of town. The building was old, but well-kept, with thick walls that kept most of the outside noise out. I locked the door behind me and sat on the couch, trying to shake the feeling of being watched. That's when my phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. "Why did you look at the house?" I froze. My fingers hovered over the screen, heart racing. I didn't reply. A few seconds later, another text arrived. "You shouldn't have." I backed away from the phone, my mind racing. Was this some kind of prank? But there was no area code, nothing to identify the sender. Then I heard it, a faint scratching sound at my front door. My first instinct was to think it was a branch or some animal, but the sound was deliberate, steady, and rhythmic. I crept toward the door, careful not to make a sound. No one was there. I locked the door again and checked the windows. Everything seemed normal, but the sense of unease was growing. I tried to call a friend for reassurance, but my phone had no signal. The next morning, I went to work and tried to put the previous night out of my mind. At school, I ran into a couple of students who asked if I had gone out for Halloween. One of them, a senior named Lisa, whispered, "Be careful tonight. Don't go near the Hollow House." I asked what she meant. She glanced around nervously and said, "It's been strange. Every year, someone disappears on Halloween. Everyone says it's cursed, but no one talks about it openly. Just stay away." I laughed nervously. "Disappears? That sounds like an old legend." She didn't laugh. "You'll see tonight. People talk, but no one goes near it. If you value your life, don't go anywhere near it." I tried to shake it off, but a seed of doubt had been planted. As evening fell, my curiosity got the better of me. I decided to take a walk back toward the Hollow House, just to see it again in the daylight. From a distance, it looked even worse than the night before. The wood rotted, windows spiderwebbed with cracks, and the pumpkin at the door seemed darker somehow. My rational mind told me it was just shadows, but my gut told me otherwise. I was about to turn back when I saw movement upstairs. A figure, tall, thin, and impossibly still, stood in the window. I froze, heart pounding. The figure raised a hand, pointing directly at me. I spun around and ran back toward my apartment. When I got home, my apartment felt suffocating. Every creak of the old wood, every gust of wind against the windows made my nerves fray. I tried to distract myself by turning on the TV, but the screen flickered oddly, showing static images between channels that seemed to linger a fraction too long. Then I noticed something on the window, a handprint smudged in the condensation just outside. My stomach turned over. I grabbed my coat and ran back into the night, not caring where I went, only needing to put distance between me and that cursed house. The following days were surreal. My coworkers noticed I was jittery, distant. I received more texts from the unknown number, each one shorter, more cryptic. Look behind you. They're close. Don't sleep. Every night I would hear the scratching, tapping, or footsteps just outside my apartment, sometimes accompanied by whispers I couldn't understand. My sleep became a battlefield. I would wake in the middle of the night to shadows moving across my ceiling, to doors that had been locked, now slightly ajar. I stopped going out after dark, but the feeling followed me everywhere. One evening, I finally broke. I decided to confront whatever it was. I grabbed a flashlight, some tools from the kitchen, and headed toward the hollow house. The air was unnaturally still, the streets empty except for the occasional rustle of leaves. When I reached the house, the front door creaked open slowly, as if inviting me inside. I stepped in. The air smelled of decay, dust, and something else, something metallic and sharp. My flashlight flickered as I scanned the room. The walls were covered in markings, scratches, handprints, and words etched into the wood. Stay, watch, join. My stomach dropped. I wasn't alone. From the corner of my eye, I saw movement. Figures emerging from the shadows, not quite human, not quite solid. They whispered my name, their voices overlapping in a chorus that made my head spin. I ran, tripping over the uneven floorboards, barely making it out of the house. Outside, the street was empty, silent. But when I turned back, I saw dozens of faces pressed to the windows of the hollow house, staring at me, grinning. I didn't stop running until I reached my apartment. I locked every door, covered the windows, and tried to calm my racing heart. That night, for the first time, I slept. But the dreams were worse than reality. I saw the figures, tall and thin, moving through my apartment, through the town, always watching, always waiting. When morning came, I realized something terrifying. The pumpkin on the doorstep of the hollow house had been moved. It was now in my yard, facing my window. The eyes, dark, wet, unblinking, stared into my room, and I knew that Halloween in Cedar Hollow was far from over. Over the next few years, I tried to leave, tried to forget. But every Halloween, the Hollow House seems to call out, its influence creeping across the town like a shadow. And every Halloween, I receive a single text before midnight, "See you tonight." No one else in town acknowledges it. They act as if it doesn't exist. But I know better. Story the end. It started like any other October in the small town of Maplewood, Pennsylvania. The leaves had turned a fiery mix of orange and red, and the crisp air carried that familiar scent of bonfires and pumpkin spice from the local coffee shops. Kids ran through the streets in their costumes, parents hustled behind them holding paper bags full of candy, and everywhere, the anticipation of Halloween hung thick. But for me, that year, Halloween wasn't just about costumes and candy. It became the night that would redefine fear for the rest of my life. I was 19 at the time, home for fall break from college, and decided to spend Halloween with a group of friends I'd known since high school. We had all been through the awkward stages of adolescence together, and while some of us had drifted in college, Halloween always seemed to bring us back together. Our tradition was simple. We'd meet at my friend Jessica's house, carve pumpkins, drink a little, tell ghost stories, and then wander the streets for trick-or-treating. Mostly because we still loved candy and the town's older residents would give out full-size chocolate bars to anyone over 18 who dared to knock. Jessica lived on the edge of town, in a neighborhood lined with narrow, twisting streets and old Victorian houses that seemed like they belonged in a different century. Some of them were abandoned, boarded up, windows cracked, and dark. The town had its share of ghost stories, of course. Maplewood was old enough that a handful of the houses dated back to the 1800s, but most were just local legends that teenagers like us delighted in embellishing over pizza and soda. That year, I had brought along my camera, wanting to capture some of the night's atmosphere. There was something about the combination of dim streetlights, fog rolling off the nearby river, and the shadows cast by the carved pumpkins that made everything feel cinematic. Our group was Jessica, her brother Michael, our friends Cody and Lindsay, and me. Jessica's mom was out of town, which meant we had the house to ourselves, a fact we all celebrated with a little too much excitement. We started the night carving pumpkins in the kitchen, the smell of fresh pumpkin filling the air. Cody had brought a small Bluetooth speaker, and we played a playlist of classic Halloween tracks, Michael Jackson's Thriller, Monster Mash, and some newer horror-themed pop songs. Between carving, we laughed at ridiculous designs. A pumpkin with a mustache, one with a toothy grin that looked like it belonged in a comic strip, and mine, which was supposed to be a vampire, but ended up looking more like a bat with a bad haircut. As the night went on, we drank some beer and whiskey, enough to loosen our nerves, but not enough to make us sloppy. By 9:30, the streets were alive with trick-or-treaters, and we decided it was time to take our own walk. That's when things started to feel off. The first thing I noticed was the quiet. Maplewood wasn't exactly a bustling city, but the neighborhood outside Jessica's house should have been filled with kids, parents, and laughter. Instead, the streets were unnaturally still. We passed a few kids running from house to house, their laughter echoing in the distance, but it felt strange, like we were being watched. Michael made a joke about it, saying, "It's probably just a ghost, Jess. Your house must be haunted or something." And we all laughed, trying to shake the uneasy feeling. We made our way down a street lined with old oaks, the branches almost clawing at the dim streetlights. That's when I first saw it, a figure standing on a porch across the street, completely still. At first, I thought it was a kid in a costume, but as we got closer, I noticed there was something wrong. The figure didn't move at all, not even when we passed right in front of it. Its head was tilted slightly, like it was staring directly at us, though there was no way to tell from the distance. "Creepy," Lindsay whispered, and we all froze for a second. Michael tried to laugh it off, but even he sounded nervous. "Maybe it's one of those Halloween mannequins," Cody said, pointing at the figure. But it wasn't. It was too detailed, too alive-looking. Its skin was pale, almost gray, and it wore what looked like a tattered Victorian dress. There was a strange aura about it, like it didn't belong in this time, in this world. We walked past quickly, trying not to look back, and I snapped a photo with my camera, mostly to prove to myself that I hadn't imagined it. When I glanced at the screen, the figure wasn't in the picture. I frowned, shrugged it off, and followed the group as we continued down the street. The rest of our walk was tense. Every shadow seemed too long, every rustle of leaves sounded like footsteps. We stuck close together, and the further we went, the fewer houses had lights on. Some of the older houses were completely dark, boarded up, their windows like black eyes staring down at us. Eventually, we reached the end of the street near the river, a spot where we often came to sit and watch the fog roll in. We found a small bench and sat, trying to calm ourselves with conversation and joking about ghosts we'd supposedly seen. That's when we heard it. The sound of footsteps crunching over the dry leaves, slow, deliberate, coming from behind the bench. We froze. Michael whispered, "It's probably just some other kids," but the sound didn't stop. It kept moving closer, circling around us, and then stopped abruptly. Silence. "Okay, that's weird," Jessica said, her voice shaking slightly. "I don't like this." I reached for my camera again, thinking maybe it was someone trying to scare us, but my battery died. I muttered under my breath, annoyed, and we decided to get up and head back. That's when we saw them. 3 figures standing at the edge of the fog near the riverbank. They were completely still, pale faces, ragged clothing, their eyes fixed on us. We bolted. No hesitation, just ran. The crunch of leaves and twigs under our feet sounded deafening, and I could hear Michael and Lindsay screaming behind me. We didn't stop until we reached Jessica's house, slamming the door shut and locking it. Inside, we tried to laugh it off, claiming it was probably just some pranksters, but our nerves were raw. We stayed in the living room, windows locked, lights on, glancing constantly at the shadows outside. The night passed slowly, with every sound. Wind rattling the windows, branches scratching against the siding, making us jump. The next morning, we discovered something that made my blood run cold. On Jessica's front porch, etched into the dirt with some kind of sharp object, were the words, "See you soon." No footprints led to the message. No signs that anyone had approached the house besides the writing itself. We never found out who or what had done it. That night should have been the worst of it, but the following weeks made it clear that Halloween hadn't released whatever had latched onto us. Strange things began happening around town. People reported seeing figures in old Victorian clothing walking through the streets at night, disappearing when approached. Children claimed their Halloween candy was moved or replaced with strange objects, bones, small animal skulls, things no one wanted to touch. For me, it was worse. Every night, I would wake up at exactly 3:07 a.m., my heart pounding, and hear faint whispers in the darkness of my room. At first, I thought it was stress or remnants of the Halloween scares, but it continued for weeks, growing louder, more distinct. The whispers seemed to form words, though I could never make out exactly what they said, except once, clearly, when a voice hissed my name. James. One evening, a few days before Thanksgiving, I was driving home from class when I saw her, the figure from Halloween, standing on the side of the road, just outside the fog, her tattered dress clinging to her, pale eyes fixed on me. I slammed on the brakes, heart hammering, and when I looked again, she was gone. But the image was burned into my mind, impossible to forget. I tried to rationalize it, telling myself it was stress, exhaustion, maybe even a trick of the fog and shadows. But then my camera, which I had stored away, mysteriously turned on by itself one night. On the screen was a single photo, me, in my room, sleeping. I lived alone at the time, and no one else had keys. The timestamp read 10/31/2023, 3:07 a.m. I left Maplewood a few weeks later, unable to deal with the fear that clung to me. I told friends it was just Halloween paranoia, but deep down, I knew it wasn't. Halloween 2023 had changed everything. It wasn't the candy, or the costumes, or the haunted houses. Something real had come out that night, something that had marked me. I've since moved to another state, tried to bury the memories, but every October, I feel it. That cold brush of air, the shadow at the corner of my vision, the whispers just beyond comprehension. And every Halloween, without fail, my phone receives a single text at 3:07 a.m. from an unknown number. See you soon. I don't answer anymore. I don't go outside. I don't carve pumpkins or celebrate Halloween in any way, because I know deep down the figures I saw that night are still out there, waiting, patient, marking the next person who will wander too far into their fog. And one day they'll come for me again. Story the end. It was late October in a small town in Pennsylvania, the kind of place where everyone knew everyone else, and Halloween was the unofficial holiday that brought the entire community together. Streets were lined with carved pumpkins, their flickering candles casting long, trembling shadows on the sidewalks. The crisp autumn air carried a faint smell of damp leaves and wood smoke from chimneys, and the sun had long since dipped below the horizon, leaving a deep, inky darkness broken only by streetlights and the occasional passing car. Ethan Sanders, a 24-year-old college graduate who had recently moved back to his hometown, had decided to take advantage of the night. He had a key to the old family home on the edge of town, a creaky two-story colonial that had been empty since his parents moved out years ago. The house had always unsettled him as a kid. Its long hallways, narrow staircases, and drafty rooms had given him countless nightmares. Still, tonight felt different. He was determined to make it a normal Halloween. Lights on, decorations up, maybe a few trick-or-treaters if the weather held. By 6 o'clock, Ethan had strung orange lights along the front porch and placed carved pumpkins on the steps, each with a flickering candle inside. The wind picked up, rustling the leaves and shaking the dry, brittle branches of the trees that surrounded the yard. He shrugged off the chill and went inside to prepare for the night. The interior of the house was as he remembered, dusty, with faint traces of the past. The old grandfather clock in the hallway ticked unevenly, and the smell of aged wood mixed with a faint, lingering mustiness. Ethan turned on the lights, hoping to make the space feel inviting, even if it was just for himself. The sound of footsteps upstairs, though he was certain he was alone, made him pause. He dismissed it as his imagination, the old house settling, and continued unpacking some boxes he had brought with him from his apartment. As the evening wore on, the wind grew stronger, carrying with it a soft, eerie whistle that seemed to seep through the cracks of the old windows. Ethan had just finished putting out bowls of candy by the front door when the first group of trick-or-treaters arrived. Kids in costumes ranging from superheroes to witches ran up the steps, their laughter and shrieks cutting through the dark. He handed out candy, smiling and joking with them, trying to push away the creeping unease he felt. Around 9, the last of the kids had left and the streets were nearly deserted. Ethan turned off the front porch lights and sat down in the living room with a beer, trying to relax. That's when he noticed something odd on the security camera feed from his laptop. A figure standing at the edge of the yard. It was a man, or something like a man, tall and thin, dressed in dark clothing that blended into the shadows. The figure didn't move, just stood there, staring at the house. Ethan froze, staring at the screen. The figure didn't look like any of the trick-or-treaters. There were no children, no parents, no passerby. Just that dark shape, barely visible under the dim glow of a streetlight. He blinked, rubbed his eyes, and when he looked again, the figure was gone. Heart pounding, he got up and walked to the window, peering into the darkness. The yard was empty, save for the shaking branches and the scattered leaves. Must be some guy walking by, he muttered to himself, though the chill crawling up his spine said otherwise. He tried to push the thought aside, convincing himself it was nothing. Yet, over the next hour, he kept catching glimpses of movement outside. A shadow flitted past a window here, a branch bent in the wind there. But sometimes he could swear the shadow didn't follow the natural movement of the trees. At around 10:30, Ethan decided to lock all the doors and close the blinds. He went upstairs to check the bedrooms, and as he passed the hallway mirror, he caught a glimpse of something in the reflection. It wasn't him. A dark figure, indistinct and moving slightly, seemed to be in the hallway behind him. He spun around, heart hammering, but the hallway was empty. The air suddenly felt colder, and the hairs on his arms stood on end. "Okay, seriously, stop it," he whispered, trying to calm himself. He checked the locks again, double-checked the windows, and finally went back to the living room. The wind had picked up even more, rattling the old windows and sending the candle flames flickering. He turned on every light in the main floor, but the shadows seemed to stretch unnaturally, pooling in corners despite the brightness. Then came the knocks. Light at first, almost polite. Tap, tap, tap. They came from the front door. Ethan froze. He hadn't left the door unlocked, and he was certain no one was outside. He slowly walked toward the door, trying to rationalize it. Maybe a neighbor's kid forgot something. Maybe a branch was hitting the door. His hand reached for the knob, and the knocking stopped. Relieved, he turned away, but then it came again, louder this time. Hard, deliberate knocks. Tap, tap, tap. Each one echoed through the house, reverberating in the walls. Ethan's stomach sank. He glanced out the peephole, but the street was empty, dark and silent. No one. He backed away from the door and, with a trembling hand, grabbed his phone to call his friend Jake, who lived a few streets over. The line rang and rang, but Jake didn't pick up. Panic began to rise in Ethan's chest. He decided to grab a flashlight and step outside, thinking maybe he could catch whoever or whatever it was. As he opened the front door, the air hit him like ice. The street was still, the trees swaying in the wind, but there was a faint sound, a dragging, shuffling noise, coming from the edge of the yard. Ethan's flashlight cut through the darkness, and there, barely visible, was the figure. Its posture was unnatural, hunched in a way that no human should be. The face was obscured by shadows, but Ethan could feel the weight of its gaze. "Hey," he shouted, trying to sound brave. "Go away." The figure didn't move. It just stood there, watching. He swung the flashlight toward it, and for a brief second, the beam revealed its face, or something that resembled a face. Pale, gaunt, with hollow eyes that seemed too large, too empty. A mouth twisted in a silent scream. Then it was gone. Vanished into the night like it had never been there. Ethan slammed the door shut and locked it. He leaned against it, gasping for breath, trying to make sense of what he'd just seen. The rational part of his mind screamed that it had to be someone in costume, or maybe the shadows playing tricks, but the primal fear that gripped him said otherwise. He sat on the couch, flashlight in hand, phone clutched like a lifeline. Minutes stretched into an hour. Then came the footsteps. Soft at first, almost cautious. Then heavier, deliberate, moving across the floor above him. Ethan's house wasn't big, and the upstairs hallway was directly above the living room. Whoever, or whatever, was upstairs. It wasn't supposed to be. He called out, his voice shaking. "Hello, is someone there?" Silence. Just the wind and the creaking of the old house. But then a door slammed shut upstairs. Hard. Ethan's mind raced. He grabbed the baseball bat he kept by the door for emergencies and slowly made his way to the stairs. Each step groaned under his weight, each one sounding louder than the last. As he reached the landing, he shone the flashlight down the hallway. The room at the far end, his old bedroom, had its door wide open. That door had been closed when he went upstairs minutes ago. "Who's there?" he shouted, panic now overtaking him. No answer. The air grew colder, and his breath came out in short, visible puffs. He took a step toward the room, bat raised, when a low, guttural sound echoed from the shadows. It wasn't human. Not quite. It was a deep, resonant growl that made his stomach churn. The sound came again, closer this time, moving toward the stairs. Ethan stumbled back, nearly falling, heart racing. He fled down the stairs and toward the kitchen, hoping to find an exit. The back door, normally bolted, was open. He hadn't touched it. Outside, the night was black, impenetrable. He ran to his car parked at the edge of the driveway and jumped in, locking the doors. The engine roared to life, and as he backed out onto the street, he glanced back at the house. Through the windows, he could see movement. Shadows shifting unnaturally, doors opening and closing on their own. The figure appeared again in the yard, standing perfectly still, staring at him. Ethan floored the gas pedal, the tires crunching over leaves, and didn't stop until he reached Jake's house. Breathless, shaking, he pounded on the door. Jake opened it, confused and alarmed, and Ethan spilled the story in a torrent of words. Jake, skeptical at first, agreed to go back with him, to check the house in the daylight. They arrived just as dawn was breaking, and the street looked ordinary, almost mundane. The yard was empty. The doors and windows were as they should be, but inside there were signs something had been there. Scuff marks on the floor, doors wide open, and a strange residue on the walls, dark, smudged, almost like soot, but sticky. Ethan never stayed in that house alone again. Halloween that year was different in the town, quieter. Stories spread among the neighbors about strange figures, lights in the windows, doors opening on their own. And Ethan, he moved out of his childhood home for good, leaving it empty, locked, and uninhabited. But every Halloween, when the wind howls and shadows stretch unnaturally, he swears he can see that figure standing at the edge of his old yard, watching, waiting, patient, and he knows without a doubt that it's not gone. Story the end.